Are we live here? Looks like it. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Welcome. My name is Hector Rosekrans. You probably all know me. I used to be the director of client services here at Casa. These days, I lead business development. And yeah, thanks for showing up. Today, this panel is going to be on the public policy landscape and what 2022 is shaping up to look like in DC, specifically for the crypto industry. And I'm joined today by probably the two best people possible to talk about this. We have Kristin Smith. She's the executive director of the Blockchain Association, and Peter Van Valkenburg, the director of research at Coin Center. So yeah, we can go ahead and get into it. And I guess my first question is just going to be for Kristin, and I want to hear what it was like on the ground when all of DC figured out that crypto was a thing last August, because we all have been doing this for a long time. We know what the industry looks like. We know the excitement and all the things that are being built in the Bitcoin world, and and the kind of broader blockchain cryptocurrency space. But I feel like DC woke up to it in a really big way last August. So tell me what that was like from your perspective of all of a sudden having the spotlight right there on what you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, it was a remarkable moment over the summer, that's for sure. I know, and Peter has been doing this longer than I have, but in my sort of 3.5 to, I guess, 4 years now working.
Not much longer, Kristin. I remember like almost at the start.
Well, it's in the beginning, we were begging for people to listen, and it was difficult to find a large. There was always a small number of sort of passionate policymakers that wanted to learn about this, but it was really hard to get people's attention, mostly because they didn't think that the crypto, Bitcoin, or crypto more generally was really a thing. They thought it was complicated. Nobody wanted to take the time to learn about it. And, I think the amount of education that happened in a 2-week period in August, really driven by this poorly written provision that was tucked last minute into the broader infrastructure bill, it was really a game-changing moment for the entire ecosystem in Washington. And I think the reason it was such a game-changing moment is because this is a community that is just highly communicative, right? You've got Reddit channels, Discord channels, crypto Twitter is people are used to moving very quickly. They're used to communicating very quickly. And, with our, the help of Coin Center and the folks that Fight for the Future and others, the community was able to mobilize. And there were about 40,000 phone calls that went into the Senate in the course of 5 days. I mean, this is truly remarkable. I've never seen a sort of grassroots movement just so instantly put together. You have folks in Washington that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year trying to figure out how to get this type of activity. And this was something that the community just sort of organically did around this provision. And I think it was because this was really the first time that your sort of rank and file lawmaker on Capitol Hill realized, oh my gosh, a lot of people care about this space. Like, we thought it was sort of some obscure tech folks or just some, the criminals that are using this or whatever the misconception may be. But really, it's, there's about 50 million people in the US that own crypto. There are a lot of people working in this space. There are a lot of people developing on these blockchains. There are a lot of people that are interested in the creator economy. And so it was just like a really, really awesome moment. And I bump into my colleagues that are in even other tech industries or more traditional industries. And they're like, how did that happen? And I said, it's the community. It's a really awesome experience, and really has put us in a position, I think, going forward to get to be taken seriously, first of all, and then that ultimately will lead to good debate and hopefully down the road, really good policy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a really kind of exciting moment, and just to see people that have been focused on this stuff for a while finally get some of the attention. And I remember reading following some Twitter account that I'd never seen before, but clearly like deep in Senate procedure, but just like all of a sudden kind of going way down the rabbit hole on this stuff, like in real time, which was a pretty exciting thing to see. Peter, what was that like for you? How did kind of Coin Center fit into everything, and how much sleep did you get? I guess is my other question.
Well, so it's funny that I'm subbing in for Jerry today because of childcare issues. we both have kids. His is ambulatory. Mine is still in the bassinet. So this is a little easier for me on a day when we've got a snow day or a COVID day in DC. But funny enough, mine was born the day before Jerry testified in front of Senate Banking, which happened right before the infrastructure fracas happened. And there was a question as to whether it'd be Jerry or I testifying at that hearing, actually. And I said, look, like, my baby could come a week or two early, and then we'd be right in the thick of it. We had to switch last minute. And so it was good that Jerry was testifying, not me, because we did end up rushing to the hospital a week or two early. And then the infrastructure bill happened, and I was on paternity leave. And I got to give a shout out to Jerry and to all bosses everywhere who have good paternity leave policies, because it's important, because it helps the moms who do the incredible, difficult work. So I got more sleep, I think, than Jerry and Robin Weissman, our chief policy counsel, who were basically having sleepless nights working with Senate procedure issues and working with people in the Senate to get them up to speed in the last minute. And I agree with Kristin that it was there was a positive element to the whole experience, and that it helped the community come together and have a bigger voice in DC. But it's also kind of a sad story, because the reason why everyone in the Senate, almost everyone in the Senate, with a few minor exceptions, had to go from 0 to 1 on crypto, to the extent they went to 1 at all, was because we don't do anything in this country in the legislature unless there's a make or break moment where something needs to get funded or not funded. And so it's absolutely insane that we were talking about whether software developers should do brokerage type reporting, which is a very complicated policy question, in the context of a make or break budget deal where no one actually knows what the topic is. They just know what they think this thing will generate as far as revenue for the federal government, and therefore can build more bridges with that extra revenue. That extra revenue is not real. It was miscalculated. It's absurd to think that you'd actually get more revenue by having miners or software developers report on their customers, because they don't have customers. And so, we've been doing this at Coin Center since 2014. We've had incredible, great champions. I'd be honest and say mostly in the House, not in the Senate. And that's more just because people in the House tend to have the more ability to specialize in niche issues like cryptocurrency. We helped found the Blockchain Caucus. We've got incredible champions like Representative Tom Emmer, who've introduced incredible legislation like a full safe harbor for non-custodial entities. But it's a slow burn for those folks who are really interested in Congress. And they can only achieve so much until everyone else gets on the same page. And it took this kind of unfortunate aspect of parliamentary policy in the US to finally get everyone to be motivated to at least learn a little bit. And I still don't think we're very far along as far as getting folks, the vast majority of folks in the relevant committees in the Senate to actually understand this stuff on a level where they could make really good policy.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. It's also a good context. Like, again, it was an exciting moment, but obviously not great procedurally that this is how it went down. And obviously with the whole Shelby thing at the end, like, you kind of knew it wasn't gonna happen. If you saw like what the hill that we had to climb at the last minute there, no pun intended. But yeah, I would say, a lot of great work, but also kind of showed, I think, how much how much our work is cut out for us. For doing that.
You can't blame Shelby, really. I mean, debate was supposed to be closed on the thing, and a lot of people did want to reopen it in order to fix this one thing that no one actually understood when it first went wrong, and then they understood it and wanted to fix it. But once you reopen the thing, everyone wants to get their own stuff in there. And you typical partisan crap, you see Democrats blaming Shelby for like wanting to reopen it for defense budget purposes, and Republicans blaming Bernie Sanders, who then said he wanted to, if it was going to reopen for that, it needed to reopen for climate change stuff. And, those are all important issues, and we probably should have more debate about those things. But the way this was structured in the Senate was once one person raised their hand and said, we need to add stuff to this bill, everyone raises their hand, and then it just becomes a pissing match.
Yeah. And again, it's painful. And I think we all got a really good, unfortunate, but a really good education in Senate procedure over those couple of weeks. But I do want to shift gears a little bit, because obviously that kind of galvanized a lot of action here. And I feel like there's kind of different coalitions forming, both kind of what I would say on our side, on the industry side, on the grassroots side, that's very, that's very kind of pro Bitcoin, pro all the things that we care about, pro open source, pro crypto. And then there does also seem to be, a few different kind of like a few different factions that are kind of forming that, that oppose us or oppose different kind of pieces for different reasons. Can you guys give me kind of an overview, or give us an overview of like, how you kind of see the different relevant stakeholders and interest groups that are all kind of coming together here? More so kind of on the, take that wherever you want, and we'll go from there.
Well, obviously the two most important stakeholders are Coin Center and Blockchain Association. But no, I think, the way I sort of categorize it in my mind is there are those individuals and organizations in the broader crypto ecosystem who get it. And then there are others that don't get it, right? There's sort of like two people. The people that get it understand that government is perceiving one industry, like they don't even understand that it's a broader community, right? They just see the industry. They see like the crypto industry or the digital asset industry. And so the people that are savvy in our space realize that we have to work together and present a unified front when working on these issues, at least from the industry side. It can kind of vary as you bring in other stakeholders. And that, as we saw in August, there were a lot of groups that traditionally hadn't worked together, a lot of new people who had just been hired on to work on these issues in Washington. And we actually gelled fairly well for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part. But then there are a lot of new organizations popping up right now that are like, oh, we got to do something in Washington. And they sort of think that if they, have a couple of meetings and write a couple white papers or something, then that's going to change the whole dynamic here in Washington. And the reality is it is a long process, sort of as Peter was alluding to before. It takes a lot of time to get that education level up. And it's not that, those of us who are working on this every day don't have a vision or a strategy. It's that it takes resources, it takes people, it takes ideas, it takes time, and it takes a lot of less glamorous work, right? Their big ideas are super fancy and you can have, some, big fancy lawyer working on something. The reality is it's just a lot of pounding the pavement, or in these days, pounding the Zoom pavement, I guess, because we don't actually always do all these meetings in person anymore, and really building relationships. And you just have to do it, thousands and thousands of times over. Now, the other sort of thing that I think will be very helpful in all this, though, in the long run, is as more and more people, there are so many that are, holding Bitcoin today or participating in other parts of the crypto economy, as more of these applications sort of come online, I think that's going to shift policymakers' minds. But, there's many of them are still struggling to see the value. They're still, grappling with that. And so I think, as that education happens, whether it be, through direct influence efforts or just through, their experience in the marketplace, we'll start to see that shift. But Peter may have a different framework of thinking about things.
Right off the bat, I totally agree with Kristin. Politics is, to quote Max Weber, the slow boring of hard boards. So you think of it like having a dull drill bit and trying to make a hole in a thick piece of wood. That's what education on the Hill looks like. And that's why it's great that we have organizations like the Blockchain Association and Coin Center who have been doing this for 5, 6, 7 years. We're getting pretty old, which is kind of frightening. Because when it became crunch time, I'm not going to give away too many nuanced details, but there were some staffers in the Senate who were previously on the Hill. And these were staffers that we'd worked on with folks in the Hill, like Tom Emmer, for example, who knew this stuff and were passionate about it and got a good base of education from us and the people in the space who we brought in to tell them about how the tech works, core developers, meetings with, folks like that. And it was those people who then stood up. So we had Senator Portman and Senator Wyden stand up, who were, technologically facile, really kind of in a bipartisan way, inspiring members of the Senate. who actually cared about the tech. But that kind of thing can't be done in a day or with a white paper, like Kristin said. And we're encouraged by all these new groups, but I hope they're not drilling a hole in the hard board that runs across the hole we've been drilling for the last 6 years and screws it all up, because politics is just so sensitive and terrible in a way. And I'm more nervous maybe than
it's not that terrible. It's the best we got,
That's the difference between Kristin and I, is I'm the self-loathing nonprofit lobbyist type, and Kristin,
I'm like the cheerleader over here.
She's got worthy optimism, very good optimism. The other thing I'd say is just sort of generally characterizing people's positions and the temperature on the Hill and in politics in general on crypto. I think things started going kind of off the rails a little bit before the infrastructure bill. I would peg it at when Facebook announced Libra as a cryptocurrency, and they used to use that term a lot before everyone in the cryptocurrency community made it abundantly clear that their thing is not crypto. It's, it's just a digital token on a permissioned blockchain. And so because of that confusion, and because everyone suddenly saw one of the big FANG companies getting involved in this space, you had people who already hate big tech and had maybe some reason to be suspicious of crypto, now hating crypto because crypto is big tech. And we've been trying to unwind that ball of wax since that announcement. And you've seen follow-on effects, not just in the US here in DC, but also, I think China's CBDC program was a big response to Facebook, actually, more than anything else, because they didn't want to see tech companies, either US ones or ones in their own borders, eating their lunch as far as surveillance of payments, which is what they want to do with their CBDC. And then you saw FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which deals with money laundering standards globally, tries to homogenize them between member nations, including the US, say, take this stuff really seriously. And it was always with a stablecoin discussion at the start. And again, I think it's because of Facebook. And now we come to this world where we have all this, dialoguing about Web3. And, unfortunately, the people who are already skeptical of big tech are now probably souring on the notion of Web3 because they see it as just a place where there's conspicuous displays of wealth like ape NFTs and gambling and giant venture capital investments in token protocols that are supposed to do things like decentralize the web, but are really just enriching a small few people who get involved with them early. And so this is kind of a disaster waiting to happen unless we can turn it around. I'm definitely playing the role of the cynic on this panel today, and there is still cause for optimism, but that's what I see as sort of the changing temperature in DC is crypto's no different than big tech, and we got to fight both of them. And that's a dangerous narrative.
Yeah, so kind of going from there and looking ahead into into 2022, how do you guys see the industry's efforts? What do you guys see as the kind of political landscape going into this election year? And then how is the industry starting to kind of think about the role that we might play in influencing some of these influencing some of these conversations?
Yeah, so I think 2022, I think across the board, we're not going to see a whole lot of substantive changes in policy. I think that, Congress is heading into an election year. There aren't many big vehicles that are probably going to get passed into law between now and then. And so the opportunity to move legislation is low. I actually think that's a very good thing because we finally have this broader audience that is willing to learn. And so I think if from the congressional perspective, if we can have Congress focus on learning about this space, getting educated on this space, and proposing ideas. We've got several legislators. We've got the House Agriculture Committee that has a draft bill they're circulating. We have Senator Lummis, Patrick McHenry. They've all been circulating bills on different topics. I think if we can get these ideas out there, if we can discuss them, if we can use them as a way to educate, that's probably the very best use for Congress's time in 2022. Peter may disagree, but on the regulatory front, that's a little bit, we'll definitely see the IRS move forward on the infrastructure bill rulemaking, and that should be an open process that I think if we do correctly, we can hopefully steer steer the direction of the broker definition in the right direction. FinCEN is fairly settled on their policy right now, and I think that's a great place for that to be. I mean, I think it's unlike a year ago when we were fighting an outgoing Treasury Secretary that was trying to pass a midnight rulemaking that would have, significantly impaired self-hosted wallets. That's not a live issue at the moment. And so if we can keep that there, that's in, sort of a good spot. There's been a lot of discussion on stable coins. Again, that's kind of in Congress's court right now. And I think we'll see ideas proposed, but not a lot out there. And then the, kind of two big issues, less important for Bitcoin is sort of the securities laws issues. And, if there's some sort of process there that gets kicked off, I think we'll probably see maybe some enforcement actions in that space, less optimistic on the regulatory side. And then the new emerging issue which has been around for a while now, is the climate conversation around Bitcoin. And I think, again, if we can keep that in the education space and try to correct some of the misconceptions about that and get people to understand the value of Bitcoin, I think we should be able to push back on any efforts on that front. So that's kind of the landscape of issues I see. And again, if we can keep it focused on education, debate, discussion for 2022, I think that's going to be a good place.
Yeah, definitely. And go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. I want to first offer a disclaimer that I do agree with Kristin's optimism about Congress being in an election year and therefore being less likely to move on things that would be bad for us. I think we won't see too much out of Congress. I would temper that by saying, that would have been great a year ago when we really liked a lot of the policies with regard to crypto. Unfortunately, the infrastructure bill passed, and two things in that infrastructure bill, the broker definition, which we discussed a little bit, but also the 60/50I reporting requirement, which we haven't touched at all, and I think is actually much worse than the broker definition, are now law. And so we kind of want Congress to roll that back, and the possibilities of that are just as slim as the possibilities of Congress doing anything negative, because Congress just isn't going to do much this year. So that's kind of a cynical take on Congress for this coming year. And also at the agency level, where the IRS has to define or offer greater guidance on the legislative definition of broker now that it's changed. I hope it's an open process that's like a rulemaking, but the track record of the IRS here doesn't look like that. They have a tendency to offer guidance, and guidance that actually misuses terminology in our space to the extent that people in our space who are, actually know what these terms mean have no idea what the IRS is saying. I'm making a not so subtle allusion to the airdrop and hard fork guidance that we got a couple of years ago, where they conflated the terms. And so I would love there to be a public notice and comment like rulemaking, or at least public process on how they implement this broker definition change. The pessimist in me thinks that we're just going to get guidance with no rulemaking or no real open public process in the next few months. And then maybe we'll get a chance to actually have a more public process if that guidance turns out to be confusing, which I'm afraid it might be.
Yeah, no, I agree with Peter. We will see guidance before we see the rulemaking, but we do have time and we're growing in power every day. But yes, it's not great. And
we should have a little time on this panel, hopefully, to just discuss why 60/50I is bad. Hector, I don't want to hijack it, but if you want to.
No, let's get into it right now. Let's talk about 60/50I, what the challenges are there, because this is Keyfest, and exactly. Our whole thing is about. First of all, I understand that we have to use the terminology that is out there. I hate the term self-hosted wallet. This is just like money you're holding yourself. It is your money, is your keys, it is your wallet. Anything else is like, the default should be that. It should not be.
It's self-hosted.
Yeah, there we go. Can you please do that can you please do that on a Senate panel one of these days or something? That would be you'd melt the internet. Maybe that's a role to just find Meltem or someone else to do that. But yeah, so let's talk about 60/50I transaction permissions and what that could entail if it kind of goes into force in its current
so real briefly, 6050I reporting existed before the infrastructure bill. It was just a report you had to file whenever in a business transaction you received $10,000 or more in cash, which doesn't happen that often. Maybe like a used car sale or something like that. But it's this report that says that you need to tell the IRS about this transaction. And interestingly, not just tell them about you and your personal information and the fact that you received this information, this cash for tax reporting purposes, but you need to talk about the person who paid you. And not just like their name and how much they paid you, their name, their address, their social security number, which you actually technically need to collect from the person who just bought a used car off of you for cash. And I think that provision was already unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. And we could get into that later because there's no third party who's reporting. It's just one citizen reporting to the government personal information about another person with no warrant or due process from a court. And so now that provision, because of the infrastructure bill, applies to crypto transactions as well as cash transactions. And so all of these self-hosted wallet transactions, one person to another, are going to be covered. And so if someone pays you in more than $10,000 worth of crypto, you're going to have to know their social security number, which of course is not something the blockchain tends to transfer from one person to another when we transact, and certainly not something we'd want it to transfer either, because that'd be a huge invasion of privacy and a terrible cybersecurity risk at that. And so this is all really bad. I think in the cash context, people just didn't probably comply all that often with the rule because they didn't even know that the rule applied to them unless they were really doing a big cash business. But that doesn't excuse noncompliance. And that means the government can go after you for a felony violation if you just forget to report once because there was one big transaction that came to you and you couldn't figure out the social security number of the person who sent it to you. So this is going to be a huge problem. And unfortunately, unlike the broker definition, the IRS doesn't have any authority to really weaken or blunt this. It's going to be as sharp as it is in the legislative language that Congress passed. And so that's going to be the law when it goes into effect in 2024. And I think we need to challenge it. And again, I think Coin Center's perspective and my perspective is we can challenge it on Fourth Amendment grounds. And we have actually really strong arguments that this is unconstitutional. But, that's fun for me as a lawyer who would relish the idea of something going all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's very not fun for everyone else because it takes years to get to the Supreme Court and then you might lose.
Yeah, definitely. So that's actually a kind of good point, because I would like to get into understanding a little bit of what that might look like, what a legal challenge might look like there. Now, would that basically have to wait until this actually goes into effect and somebody makes a transfer and then you have standing to start to actually challenge this, so that you wouldn't even get a case anywhere before 2024? Or is that something that you can start to have legal challenges, or start to at least have legal challenges before it actually goes into
Hector,
effect?
you're right on the money. You have to be very careful with these challenges because courts love to dismiss them on grounds unrelated to the issue at heart. So the court would say, you don't have standing because the injury hasn't occurred yet. And so come back later, which is another way of saying, let's just not deal with this. And maybe when you try to come back later, they say, oh, now you don't have standing for some other reason. So you have to be really careful that the claims that we bring, and we might want to bring a claim as a large group together. Maybe Coin Center's one plaintiff. Maybe there's other plaintiffs that are Blockchain Association or their members or just individuals in the space. And you want to have a bunch of people so that if anyone gets thrown out for standing, the rest of the lawsuit continues going forward. There is potentially a way to make arguments that the impending threat of felony liability for receiving transactions is itself a harm because it sort of chills people's transactions in advance of that change in the law. But again, we want to be really careful not to oversell our standing arguments, because if we get thrown out on standing, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I think, whether it be 6050I or other issues around the government, we're in the process right now of thinking through what sort of litigation might play out over the next couple of years, and I think that is a very powerful tool. When we were looking at the midnight rulemaking that was coming down last year, that was a very clear, or fairly clear, we thought, or Administrative Procedure Act violation. And so, there are process challenges that, if they present themselves, I think that we're going to be ready to jump on, as an association. The constitutional stuff, it's, there's a lot of different ways I think that could play out. But we see this as definitely a tool that we are not hesitant to use. But again, given like what Peter said, you don't want to push this through and do it in a way that's sloppy. It has to be incredibly well thought out. And
as a data point, the court case that actually said that the Bank Secrecy Act is constitutional, one of the plaintiffs challenging the Bank Secrecy Act's constitutionality was the ACLU. And the ACLU said, you're going to have banks where people make donations to us, list our donors, and they're going to lose their privacy, therefore. And that's a First Amendment violation because it's right of assembly, as well as a Fourth Amendment violation because it's, a search without a warrant. And the court in California Bankers Association versus Schultz, ACLU was another plaintiff along with California Bankers Association, said, oh, wait, can you prove that any of your members actually were subject of a CTR report? And the ACLU said, no. And the court said, okay, well, we're throwing this whole First Amendment argument out. Maybe it'll come back in the future. It came back in the future in a case called Miller. And in that case, not Miller versus Schultz, Miller versus US. And Miller was a bootlegger. He was making whiskey in the woods in North Carolina, I think. And the bank was reporting on his purchase of vans and distillery equipment. And you get a much less sympathetic client. They're like, well, maybe it's okay that the bank reports on people who are illegally making booze. I actually don't think it is, but it becomes a very different conversation than what would have been the conversation with the first case, where it's the ACLU. It's the organization that stood up for civil rights and civil liberties. There's so many ways this could get screwed up.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, with all this, whether it's regulatory rulemaking or how things play on the courts, or just what things are going on in the administration, I'd like to talk a little more about that. But it does seem like there's a lot of it comes down to sympathies, it comes down to like grassroots politics and like what the kind of vibe is within the electorate and within the stakeholders. And so I know you guys focus on the Hill and talking to the current legislators and the current policymakers. If I had my old boss, Ryan Selkis, on here, I would be talking about how this 2022 is an opportunity for us to really make our voices heard at the ballot box, with lobbying local officials, whether that's in primaries or in generals. Like, I think there is an opportunity for us to very much kind of shift the direction and the tone of the conversation and the energy. And I also respect the people that meet with people that might be challenged by some of those upstarts, or might not want to spend a lot of time talking about, let's go primary, everybody. So I'll leave that statement there, and let's talk a little bit more about like what's going on within the administration, like within the executive branch. How are these questions playing out? It feels like there's a lot of kind of energy coming from Treasury, coming from Janet Yellen, and obviously Gary Gensler has his stuff as well at the SEC. But I get the sense that there's also some. I get the sense that it's not all negative on that side. I do get the sense that there's some voices there that maybe if they're not total industry supporters, they're at least curious enough, and because it doesn't feel like there's been. It feels like there's some hesitancy somewhere within the administration. How are you guys thinking about like where the administration is these days on these questions?
I mean, definitely better than the last administration. So we're directionally moving forward. I certainly don't think it is as strong as we would want an administration to be, but I do think there's been just some positive trends. I think that, in particular, the Treasury Department has been much more open to listening than, especially the previous Treasury Department. And, so I'm fairly happy with where we're at there. We've had good dialogue with the White House. It's certainly, not as positive as I think, I would want it to be, being the, you know, optimistic, happy one over here. But yeah, definitely better. You know, the SEC is a little bit of a different situation. I think, you know, Gensler does have some legitimate concerns, and I think people in the industry, you know, care about consumer protection, and they care about market integrity. But I think at least my members at the Blockchain Association see that there's still a lack of clarity on those securities laws, and sort of disagree with Gensler's view that everything is a security and should be regulated like one. You know, Gensler wants everybody in this space to come register with the SEC, and the very act of doing that would have just consequences that would kind of jam up the whole system. So, but you know, I think FinCEN is in a good spot. The IRS is, you know, again, open to listening and learning, though, you know, maybe still somewhat early in the process, but yeah, directionally positive.
So I agree. The only thing that I'd add is, you know, we need to understand that because crypto has become much more high profile, there's a lot more people higher up in these agencies and in the executive branch taking an interest. And the first thing that they notice when they take an interest is whatever caught their attention. And so that's not necessarily the infrastructure bill. That's not necessarily, you know, the ICO boom or anymore, or the securities laws issues. I think it's mostly ransomware now. So when, you know, the National Security Council takes a look at this and says, what the hell is happening? Or when mainline Treasury, as opposed to FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Network subdivision of Treasury, when they first wake up to this, it looks awful. It looks like the Colonial Pipeline hack, where people on the East Coast couldn't refill their gas in their cars and may have gotten stuck on roads. I almost got stuck on roads after like not being able to refill my van for 4 different gas stations. And that's terrifying. And they see the payments being made in crypto. And, you know, Coin Center wrote an article in 2016 that said cryptocurrency is not the cause of ransomware. Because of course it's not, because ransomware predates cryptocurrency. They used to use Blue Dot cards and other things to collect payments. But that only gets you so far. And, you know, the response then at mainline Treasury, for example, is, all right, what can we do to stop this? What can we do to stop the payments that drive this activity? Because it's the way that hackers are monetizing, you know, penetrating systems. And then, yes, there are people in those agencies, usually at the lower level or the long-term staff level, who've been dealing this with for a long time, like the folks in FinCEN, who say, you want to like bring the hammer down on this space, all you're going to do is destroy law enforcement visibility into these networks. Like if you make it illegal for, you know, law-abiding companies like Coinbase or Kraken to do this business, then we're never going to catch the people who are using these networks for ransomware, because it's those places where we get visibility into the system. And so that's probably the conversation that's going on. And so, Hector, I like, it's not exactly as positive as maybe, like, there aren't necessarily champions. They're just people who understand, probably because they've been well educated in the space over the last 6-7 years, that this stuff isn't going away. And the only thing you do when you take an overly aggressive approach towards regulating it from a financial crimes perspective is destroy the ability of law-abiding citizens to use this technology for good, and enhance the ability of criminals to hide while using this technology.
Yeah, definitely. And that's such an important point. You know, I have for anyone who doesn't know, I do have a bit of a national security background. I was in the U.S. military for 5 years after doing my undergrad at Annapolis. And one of the things that I just see is that, you know, if you look at like the potential risk from the national security perspective, from the economic perspective of like China's CBDC going out into every third world country in Africa, all within their sphere of influence, you see, like, you know, that is kind of happening. And, you know, if we, you know, that is like a serious risk to just like our economic position. And clearly seems like the way to combat that would be a free and open source wallets that are freely able to use, that don't have the kinds of restrictions they're going to put on it.
Crypto is the American way of doing digital money.
Yeah, and it's a way that we can spread our values around the world without maybe the military footprint that comes with some other costs as well. But that's a whole other conversation that that I won't get into too much here. But yeah, so it's useful to understand that and to kind of see where people, it's so obvious, like the big risks, the cyber security things, any of the news items. It's like, oh, crypto is bad for the environment, or oh, Bitcoin's bad for money laundering. You have to think deeply about the long-term structural things that we can provide as a benefit. So yeah, I guess that's, I guess I should get into some audience questions here. And the first one is just, can we get into a little bit of detail? I want to talk mining into in a minute, but can we get into a little bit of detail on like what a SAR is versus the 6050I report? Are those the same things? Are those different? Yeah. Can you guys a little bit of clarity there?
Real briefly, because it's a pretty clear distinction, actually, once you hear it. The SAR report is something that a Bank Secrecy Act obligated institution needs to file. So these are like money transmitters, like custodial exchanges, individuals dealing in transactions. Like if I have a Casa wallet or a Trezor or something, I don't have to file SARs when I receive transactions from other individuals or from other financial institutions. So if somebody uses their Coinbase account to pay me at a Casa wallet, I don't have to file a SAR. Coinbase might, I don't know, it depends. But that's the good thing about SARs. And there's another question in here about how can we regulate this space for law enforcement visibility without destroying the basic premise of Bitcoin. And we've always said you regulate the on-ramps and the off-ramps, the custodial exchanges, and you never regulate transactions, certainly not for financial surveillance purposes. 6050I, unlike SARs, doesn't follow that pattern. It says, no, we're going to regulate every person using this technology when the transaction is incoming more than $10,000 or outgoing more than $10,000. Both of those people have to file a report. And that is a level of financial surveillance that is simply untenable under the Fourth Amendment, I would argue. And back to our constitutional challenge, we won't go into it. And also untenable for the technology, because like, what if I get paid $10,000 or more from a DAO or from a robot smart contract for buying, well, it wouldn't be Wi-Fi because that'd be a whole lot of Wi-Fi bandwidth. But actually, maybe if it were a corporate purchaser of some micropayments enabled Wi-Fi. No, it's not micropayments. Okay, I've shot my own argument in the foot, but you get the idea. Like, we don't always have a social security number to report when we get a transaction, and so this law doesn't make sense. It's very distinct. It applies to every individual rather than just BSA regulated entities.
Thanks. So I did want to share this a little bit, and just because I think I heard there's a hearing coming up in the House, and I did see some letter that references the infamous mining report. How is the other conversations around proof of work mining shaping up right now, and how are you guys thinking about our the industry's positioning on that?
I actually think, at least from a blockchain association perspective, this is a space that I wish we had the bandwidth to get into 18 months ago, but we're just now getting involved. I think we're going to bring somebody on board to actually focus on this issue full time because it's just a totally different language than when you're talking to the folks doing financial services policy. But I actually think what's going on here is you have people like Elizabeth Warren and others that don't like Bitcoin, and so because it's too complicated to convey to people what Bitcoin is, it's easier to just talk about the climate issue because that's kind of a built-in base. So I think people are using the climate issue to go after Bitcoin. I'm actually, there's supposed to be a hearing later this month in the House Energy and Commerce Committee on their Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee. I think those actually might be more balanced than, sometimes maybe I'm optimistic because like the bar is like so low that like, if there's anything better than that, I'm like, ooh, progress. Like, I think that may end up being slightly more balanced than, at least I was sort of originally expecting. We'll see what witnesses they ultimately settle in on. But our conversations with the subcommittee have been surprisingly productive. But yeah, I think the challenge there is, that you can argue over the analysis as to, what is the actual energy consumption of Bitcoin. But the real challenge we have is we need to convince people that Bitcoin is valuable and like worth whatever it is. And that is, that I think that is sort of our focus. What I'm trying to steer away from is, proof of stake is superior to proof of work because it uses less energy. No, there's total trade-offs there, and we need to be able to talk about those. So yeah, I think this is going to be, again, back to what I was saying earlier, a big year of education around this front and trying to correct some of the misunderstandings about how this works, but also just convincing people of Bitcoin's value and importance.
Yeah, I'm much less on the political side of things at Coin Center. We have incredible policy counsel Robin Weissman, who focuses on like getting the Hill to understand these issues. Just from a policy standpoint, I'll say, look, we've got great arguments that are very genuine. That, for example, a Bitcoin miner is the best demand response provider for an energy grid that you could ask for. And Nick Carter's made these arguments very well. We've written them, maybe not as well as Nick. He's kind of a master in this space. But in a nutshell, that means that, like, look, you've got solar and you've got wind on the grid, and when you get a lot of sun or a lot of wind, energy spikes, and you got to get rid of it somehow. Grids fail if you don't get rid of excess energy, and you want someone like a Bitcoin miner who's super willing to suck up that extra energy and make it into Bitcoins. And then maybe you pay them to not mine when you have a deficit on the grid, when you don't have enough energy on the grid. And this could be a great complement to green technology for greening our grids. But that is an extremely nuanced and complicated argument that involves both engineering knowledge of cryptocurrencies and why proof of work is maybe valuable, and also engineering knowledge of grids and why grids and renewables are kind of special compared to old main, power providers like coal power plants that just stay on and are relatively constant. And so it's hard. And Kristin's totally right. The conversation becomes less about that, where we can have a really cool discussion about like this amazing technological future of green America where there's Bitcoin miners providing a real service. And the conversation just becomes, oh, well, there's all this energy usage for this thing that I think is nothing but gambling, conspicuous wealth, explosive NFTs and Bitcoin balances and crime. And so why is any energy being dedicated to that? And my only response to that is, well, my first response is, of course, to convince them that Bitcoin's valuable. But that sometimes is a complete non-starter. My other response is, all right, you're really concerned about energy usage, but we can't get into this battle where we start saying that your particular usage of energy is invalid and your particular usage of energy is valid. Like, maybe I don't like Mac unibody construction. Aluminum smelting, which Macs are made out of, is one of the most energy intensive activities on the planet. We can't start saying like I want more laptops and less Bitcoin, or I want more food production and less laptops. If you're worried about energy usage, cap and trade. Like, that's not Coin Center's official perspective, and not something we necessarily say. But personally, I'm like, look, there's a reasonable economic idea here that Pigovian taxation, which is an old idea from Arthur Pigou, a very old classical economist, that says, oh, we'll just tax the things you don't like in the economy. Which is like, how do you know that that thing is a bad in the economy? It creates negative externalities. How do you know for sure? Once you start taxing it, you interrupt the price mechanisms, and we don't even know whether the negative externalities existed in the first place. Instead, Coase, Ronald Coase, University of Chicago economist, brilliant, says, look, just create entitlements and then let people in the market bargain for them. So we're not going to ban Bitcoin mining because it uses electricity. We're just going to say any use of electricity has costs above a certain level, and people in the economy can negotiate for where the costs should be borne, whether they should be borne by the Bitcoin miner or traded to somebody else who bears them instead. Like, that's brilliant. But this is not the conversation on the Hill or anywhere ever anymore.
No, and that's I think that's a really good point. Just something that it seems like the same impetus that it's like, oh, well, we're just going to do a CBDC and we promise we'll be really nice about it. We won't restrict transactions, or oh, we're going to implement these, we're going to implement these super onerous rules at the policy level, but I promise we'll be nice on the rule making on the rule making front. It does seem like there's an impetus to just increase the amount of control kind of across the board, and that's that's the impulse that I think, broadly speaking, that, we are the Bitcoin, the crypto industry is at the forefront of kind of pushing back against that. There's a lot of people who want that, but
it's really hard. Like,
but
there's this concept in political science called the bootlegger and the Baptist, and it was about prohibition. It was the Baptists who were the face of the pro-prohibition movement. It's godly to not drink, but it was the bootleggers that paid for all the lobbying because they knew they could make money off the illegal liquor trade. And that's just what happens in this space. Like, climate change will be the Baptist to the bootlegger who just wants to make cryptocurrencies illegal because they want to replace them with surveillable, terrible for privacy, terrible for liberty payment methods.
Yeah, well, that's also a great transition point here. And again, I come down to, I come down to this idea that a lot of these fights are going to have to be won probably outside the like legible halls of power and within political action on a more local level, and showing like that this is a real community that cares about privacy, that cares about kind of independence and these values. And so what from your perspective, like, are things that individuals can do right now to really, have these conversations, to start to try to like shape some deeper narratives at a grassroots level? Like what can we do? What can we all do other than, and obviously donate to Coin Center? Kristin, I don't know if most people on the phone can afford what you guys do, although there's probably some out there. But yeah, what can individuals do to try to be a part of a movement that shapes the narrative, that changes the facts on the ground from a political perspective in DC?
I mean, honestly, right now, it's political giving is the top on my list, and it's smart political giving. There's super PAC money, and then there's sort of these like hard dollar PACs. Individuals can give up to $5,800 to a federal candidate. And I think at the very least, if we can have people in the community build relationships with their own congressmen and senators in a fundraising context and talk about all of the cool things they're doing, I think that is very helpful. If you look around the country, we have some candidates that are running on a kind of a pro-crypto platform. Those are a little bit more high risk when you have somebody sort of new coming in. But I think we want to encourage people to make good Bitcoin policy and good crypto policy part of their campaign. And people have, we've seen this across the country. You've got a woman running against Brad Sherman in California who didn't know anything about Bitcoin, but has been learning about Bitcoin and talking about Bitcoin just because Brad Sherman hates Bitcoin. So yeah, I think having, sort of a robust political giving community within the crypto community is a missing tool that we haven't had up until the past 6 months.
I'm not an expert in PACs, and
Peter doesn't like that stuff.
No, I defer to Kristin because I think she's absolutely right. And the more we can support people who've got good platforms when they want to run, the better. But that's not my world. I think the one thing I'd add is, we saw a lot of grassroots efforts, like call your congressman, tweet about this, talk about this during the infrastructure bill thing. That was very positive on balance. It's a double-edged sword, though, because we don't want to be perceived as just like a grumpy, horrible community that will like out congressmen for being total shitheads with literally that word or something, And so I guess, the crypto community, especially the Bitcoin community, is so libertarian. It's very like, no, I want to do my own grassroots advocacy my own way. I would say, hopefully you've seen the work that Coin Center's done year over year and you like what we do. And if you want to donate, that's great. But even if you don't, I'd ask, we try and be sort of a bellwether along with great organizations like Fight for the Future of like when it really is important for grassroots to come speak up and how they can speak up in a way that will be productive rather than short circuit the conversation in DC by being too negative. So, I'd just ask you to pay attention and hopefully you trust us. And when we say you got to speak up, you got to speak up.
Yeah, that's really helpful. But Kristin, I also like what you said, and I don't totally understand the pack world. I think there's a lot of smart people doing that. But I guess like what I would kind of emphasize from that, particularly kind of for this audience, is look, if Bitcoin has been good to you, if investing in the space has been good to you, put some of that capital at stake like this year to try to get on the calendar of your local congressman. Like, let them know that this is real, that this matters to you, that you are one person, maybe not, maybe you're not going to fund their whole campaign, but there's a few, if you get on a local congressman and get a few people that contribute $20,000 to their campaign across the, across the four of you, that's something that every single local congressman, maybe short of Nancy Pelosi, if you're in San Francisco, is going to really notice.
Yeah, no, a little bit. And you don't necessarily, I should clarify, there's two ways to give. You can give through political action committees, or you can just individually give $5,800. You can give $5,000 to a PAC, $5,800 to a candidate. And those direct hard dollars to candidates are incredibly valuable. And, you can go through their campaigns. You can request a meeting for a half an hour to just build a relationship. Now, you can't make hard policy asks in that meeting if it's a fundraiser, but yeah, you can talk about what you're doing and what you're building and why you care about this space.
All right, great. Well, we're getting pretty close to the hour here, so I wanted to start wrapping up, and I'll say this, Kristin, what are your, and I'm gonna frame it like this, Kristin, what are your biggest concerns for 2022 going ahead here for for where things are at right now?
Yeah, I mean, what sort of keeps the challenge that I see, at least from sort of the Washington perspective, is there are so many new voices that are coming into this space, whether it be new organizations or just new individuals who are excited about this space. We're also seeing a lot of companies in this space that are hiring internal government relations people and policy people. They're bringing on outside lobbyists. There are so many people involved right now that I think the biggest challenge we have is to make sure that all of this is coordinated and that everybody has the background and the education that's necessary. It's a wonderful problem to have because we didn't have the number of boots on the ground to go be effective in Washington. And so, I think it's really a logistical challenge at this point to try to make sure that we're most effective and utilizing all these great resources that are just kind of showing up for the first time.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say one specific concern that I had to kind of expand on that is just I think there's a potential scissor issue, which if you guys aren't familiar with policy is just an issue that you can drive a wedge between a community that might actually be aligned on a lot of things, but you can just totally split them into two and have them fighting like cats and dogs.
Yeah.
And if I were an evil anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto person, I would try to drive a huge wedge through this community around proof of work versus proof of stake. I think there's already a lot of contention there, and it's such an obvious play if you're just an evil, diabolical person in a position of power. But I want to close it out with something optimistic. So, Peter, what are you most excited about for 2022 on the policy front?
You want to close out with optimism, and you ask me? I am still optimistic about bank secrecy policy, actually. FinCEN knows what it's doing. There's great people there. I hope they stay there. See the cynicism creeping in. If they stay there, I think we need to have sense.
Please don't hire anyone from FinCEN.
It's like mild inside baseball, but I think that's okay for me to share with this group. This is not going public, right?
Quay, I don't think this is going.
I'll be careful anyway.
Be careful.
So, FinCEN, I think, and the folks in FinCEN are brilliant and care about the tech. And sometimes that's because they see incentive alignment here, where we'll lose visibility for law enforcement if we come down too hard on this stuff. And sometimes it's because they actually think it's really good tech. And they stood up for us in a big way, like the staff level and the lifer level there, against things like the midnight rulemaking against Mnuchin, who wanted to impose much more reporting requirements. And they were a voice of reason in the discussions with FATF. And FATF is the international body that sets standards here. And if FATF goes bad, which it very well might, and tries to push countries to regulate, say, self-hosted wallet providers and developers, maybe the US will be kind of one of the few standing in the wind and saying, no, that's a free speech activity. You can't tell people who publish software what they have to write in their code. And part of that will be because, good folks at the agency level actually care about the tech and care about the future.
All right, well, that's great, and I love ending on that note. Kristin, Peter, thank you guys so much for your time, and donate to Coin Center, donate to your congressman, and think and definitely when these guys ask you to step up on Twitter, let's blow it up in the right way for people. All right, have a good day, guys.
Thanks, Hector.
Thanks, Hector.
Thanks, Kristin.